The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio with me, Megan Cornwell. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith and ministry. My guest today is Robert and Liz Glover. Robert was asked to set up the very first family-based fostering and adoption agency in China. His charity, Care for Children, has placed over 1 million orphans in loving families across China and beyond. In 2005, Robert was awarded an OBE for services to orphans and vulnerable children. All of his work has been underpinned by his Christian faith and a resolute sense of calling from God. Robert and Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Megan.
We're in the middle of a pandemic, as you well know, which experts believe originated in the wet markets of Wuhan, China, a country that you're both very familiar with. Did you see these wet markets when you lived there? And if so, can you describe them for us?
Yeah, I mean, they're everywhere. That's how you shop in China. You know, your fresh produce, your meat, you would they're generally cover quite a large area, and they have different avenues. So you have all your fish in one area, and obviously they're all live, and you buy your fish live, and then it's prepared there in front of you. And also with your chicken and things like that, there are chickens and things, and then of course your vegetables and everything else is there, and it's very good food and meat and vegetables, and it's just a bustling, lively. I mean, it would be similar to one of the markets in London, you know, where you've got the people shouting out what they're selling, and that's sort of what it's like. Yeah.
So my understanding is it's a really kind of deeply ingrained part of Chinese culture, these wet markets. But obviously, as we've seen with the pandemic, there is this risk of outbreak. You've seen a lot of cultural change in China over the years that you've worked there. Do you think this is an area that you will see the government being able to change, or will it be, because it's so much part of sort of traditional heritage, it will just be very difficult to change people's views on live animals, wild animals, etc.?
I think it's already changing. We're seeing and hearing that has changed, and you know, because obviously all the health situations has to be put in place. I think for a long time, you know, Chinese are very pragmatic and practical, and you know, they will deal with this and they will sort it out. The sort of culture that comes from is the fact of it's fresh, you know, and it's almost kind of opposite in the sense that we have gone into, you know, supermarkets and everything, and nobody knows where our food comes from. And people in the West are trying to move towards more healthy, fresh food, and now what we're seeing in China, pressure for that to be reversed, in the sense many people, you know, wouldn't trust refrigeration or, you know, freezers, and would prefer to have fresh food to their table. So it's quite interesting as the West are trying to find more organic, you know, more fresh food. That was very much the case of living in China, but now that will obviously reverse and become quite different.
There's already a lot of distrust, isn't there, between the West and China? Are you concerned at all that the current crisis might exacerbate that sort of dynamic?
I don't think so. I mean, I think anybody who really knows China knows that that's quite superficial. You know, our experience of living in China is that we would read sometimes the news and hear the reports on TV, and living there is, you know, you experience exactly what happens. So, you know, the people in China are beautiful people. They're amazing, humble. And of course, the Christians are just incredible in their faith and their journey. And so I think, someone wrote an email to me recently referring to China around some issue between China and America. And I said, well, what is China? There are 50 people in the Chinese government that make up the party Congress, but there are 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people that we know that live in the towns and villages are just, some of the amazing people. And, for Elizabeth and I living in big city like Shanghai with our children, we never felt threatened. Our girls could go out in the evening and never feel unsafe. And so I think there is a lot of unspoken of the reality of what true life in China is like.
Some misunderstandings, perhaps.
I think it becomes political, doesn't it? And when we were in China, people would say, "Do you always carry an umbrella in England?" And I'd say, "Why?" Well, it rains every day, so that you get these stereotypes. And, I think these stereotypes grow. And I think this is something that captivated me to go to China, because there was this mysterious culture, a country with all sorts of ideas about it. But, if you live there and alongside the Chinese, then you actually get to experience and know they're beautiful people.
On the profile, Robert and Liz, we like to ask our guests about their personal faith journey. Can you tell me a bit about how you both became Christians?
Well, I didn't become a Christian until 1990. So I was raised in a non-Christian family. No one in my family was a Christian. And I met Robert in 1981. I don't know. He was a friend of my brother's. So he just seemed this mysterious big guy with a deep voice. And I was just drawn to him, and I can remember him saying a few things about God. And I just thought, that's really interesting. Like that really sort of intrigued me. Anyway, we started to date, and then we got married in 1984. And we moved into a new house, and each side of the house we had Jehovah's Witnesses, which we didn't know at the time. But I had started to feel, I think, that, I don't know, life was a little bit disappointing. And so the Jehovah's Witnesses started to give me Bible studies, and I was interested in those, but I knew Robert was not very happy with that. And we were attending the Church of England church, going along to that. And the vicar would say, the Jehovah's Witnesses are not okay. You shouldn't be listening to them. And the Jehovah's Witnesses were saying that the Church of England were hypocrites. Anyway, there was all this controversy going on over my head, and I had started to feel like wake up in the night and just feel like, I don't know, very lost. So it was the day before I was due to go to the Kingdom Hall, and I just said to Jesus, I just said to God, if you're real, I know it's all about Jesus. So if you're there, show me. And I can remember opening my Bible and reading, remember this above all else. And I thought, oh, my goodness, I found the most important bit in the Bible. And what it said was, no prophetic word came about by the will of man. And I realized at that point, and obviously it was Holy Spirit revelation, really, for me at that point. I realized that the Jehovah's Witnesses were preaching a message that was for them, which is, you do want to live on earth forever. So I ran round and spoke to them, and I ran round to the vicar and told him as well. And that the Jehovah's Witnesses said, that doesn't mean that to us. And the vicar was very excited. But there was a couple that had been praying for us down the road. They were Christians. And I went to them and I said, Jesus is real and the Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong. And they said, praise the Lord. So I just, from that point, I can remember watching the news for the first time that, I always say for the first time that evening, because I watched it and I'd never seen good and evil. Suddenly I could see good and evil. It was clear as day. And I could not get enough of my Bible. I just wanted to read. And Robert always says he came home to a new wife that night. So yeah, my conversion was an instantaneous, very quick, and yeah, I had that sort of born again experience, which is precious to me. And yeah, that was me.
Thank you, Liz. Was that also the case for you then, Robert? Did you also have a sort of light bulb moment?
No, absolutely not. Mine was a long drawn out affair with God, tussle, really. As a young, obviously a young man, not having a father. My father left when I was 2. I didn't really ever know him. I just really sensed the presence of God and God the Father, and was very passionate as a young boy, I suppose. Around the age of 12, I was confirmed in the Church of England, and so very aware of what Jesus had done for me, and Father God, who really stood in the gap. I felt, but like many young, through adolescence and young adulthood, sort of God can wait. And I went into football and then Royal Navy, and had a few experiences where, I think we all do, we get in our desperation, we call out to God. But then had a real encounter where sometimes God says, right, enough's enough, and brick wall. I had an illness, which I was miraculously healed from. And I think that was around a similar time to Elizabeth's experience. And so gradually went from seeing the flames fanned, and then, I think once you realize what Jesus has done and you want to give your life, I think we went through a period of a couple of years where we just prayed, God, use us. We want to be used. And that's a dangerous prayer, isn't it? Because God certainly then started to put things in place. I always remember Jackie Pullinger saying to me, why did you go? I said, I don't know. I mean, there's probably 1,000 people better qualified than me could have gone. And she said, well, thank God you went, because if you hadn't, it would never happen, And I think that was the case at the end of the day. We were fervent and ready to go.
Well, we'll get on to your relationship with Jackie Pullinger later on. But first, let's talk about your calling. So your career started in the UK in terms of your work with vulnerable children. Let's talk a bit about those early days.
So, well, on the back of football, which hadn't worked very well, and then the Royal Navy, I thought the Royal Navy would be a good opportunity to get out to the South China Seas. Even in those days, I had this desire for mysterious country of China. But I ended up in a submarine in the Baltic. And so, again, that sort of came to an early close. And on return, I got involved in social services. I became a social worker. I was involved in residential care, and then looked into the whole area of family placement, fostering officer. We then went to Guernsey, where I had a wider task of working with children. But in all that experience, what I realized was that residential care was not serving children very well, and that actually children need families. I always remember one incident in China. It's a bit fast forward. I was speaking on CCTV, which was Chinese Central Television, by the way. And the interviewer said, we're just about to go live. There's 500 million people watching. Why do children need families? And I don't know if you had the experience, but it just came to me. This wisdom came from the Holy Spirit, and I just said, simply, God made the family for children. And suddenly the studio went deathly quiet. The people looking around. Well, can he say that? Can he say God in? And then someone said yes, and someone yes, and they all agreed. And I think there was this realization that Chinese are very pragmatic and practical. they understood God. They do understand who God is. And family life is so rich in China and so part of their culture and their heritage that, it was a simple statement that they were able to digest. And I think that was something in my early stage of social work, is that a realization that children really do need families and they need family care. So it became part of my DNA of how do you then look at social reform, childcare social reform? How do you reform, the whole infrastructure? Lord Lemming said to me once, Lord Herbert has become a very good friend of mine. He said to me once that if the system is not working for the children, then you have to change the system. And I think that's what I was about. I was about that in the early days in my social work, and which then was carried forward, that experience of when God had called me on this journey to China.
Tell us about how you went from working in the UK system to working in China.
As I say, I had this fascination for China. I just felt that God had put that in my heart from a very young age. And there were a couple of prophetic words that were given to me. And I remember quite early on in Guernsey, a gentleman, Dave Devenish, came to our church and he preached, and he came over and prayed with me, and he just said, I sense you are going to be father to as many children as the stars in the sky. And I thought, well, that's going to be quite an achievement. We got 6 children, I think, by then, and we were doing Sunday school and children's work. And so you kind of try to deal with it in your subconsciousness and move on. And then as time had moved on, I think we were at Stoneleigh Bible Week, and an Australian man called Pete Brooks came again and prayed for me. And he said, I just sense within this year, you're going to be in an earthquake. And this is where God wants you to be. Well, of course, apart from this period of time in my life, I've never had anything like this. So I didn't understand what this meant. In an earthquake, I thought, I remember meeting my friends and saying, we don't have earthquakes in the UK. He obviously, has got that wrong. And anyway, within that year, November, I got the opportunity to go to China. And Liz was amazing. She just said, yeah, you should go. This is something you always wanted to do. So, go. And just before we left in the church, all our church gathered around and prayed for us. And a little girl had a picture of us with an Olympic torch, taking it to cities in China. And again, didn't really understand that, but off we went. And in those days, you had to fly through Hong Kong. So we went to Hong Kong. We spent some time with Jackie, and just loved listening to the guys, and these drug addicts and their lives, and how. And we sat drinking tea with them, and Jackie said, look, we don't get fathers coming in talking to the guy. Will you always come in and, spend time with them? And I said, of course I will. And went into Shanghai, flew into Shanghai airport, and a Chinese lady, gave us tickets to Special Olympic Games. My friend said, no, we don't want to go there. But I remembered the little girl's dream or vision. And so we went to this. We had tickets numbered. My friend sat next to someone he got on really famously with, and I sat next to someone who was introduced to me as a senior member of the Communist Party. So I've been very careful, thinking, they're trying to catch us out. We're 007 Christians, and we've got to be really careful here. Anyway, we were talking backwards and forwards, and at the end, he said something really strange. He said, looking up in the sky, he said, all the work I do for the children is for my father. And I was thinking he's trying to catch me out, and, I'm not going to say anything. And so he carried on talking about how he was raised in a mission school in Yunnan province. And I don't know if anybody's had this experience before, but my heart started to beat fast. And before I knew it, I said, we're Christians and we come with a heart to serve. And I thought, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And he said, which hotel are you staying in? And we told him, and he said, I'll pick you up tomorrow at 8:00. So walking out, my friend had a great time with talking to his friend. He said, what's the matter, Rob? I said, well, that man's a senior member of the Communist Party. I told him we're Christians, and he's picking us up tomorrow morning. Anyway, they picked us up, and we went to this dinner, and there were some other Westerners there, and they were wagging their fingers and telling them off. I was thinking, how rude, these people have, these were government people and they'd invited us to dinner, and I was just saying the food is lovely and the drink and the company and everything was wonderful. They'd hosted us, and I didn't realize that was very much Chinese culture. The word guanxi about doing relationship, and you don't get into business until you've enjoyed food and hospitality. I just did that naturally. And so it wasn't surprised that they got rid of these other people and brought me back. And we had some more talks, and they asked me about family placement. And so I started to share with them about, a positive alternative to institutional care. And they really loved it. And they asked if we'd come back and help them. Well, that night we went back to the hotel, and there was a wedding, and we got involved in the wedding and went back up to our room. My friend was reading a book and I was watching football on TV. And then he said, "Are you rocking my bed?" I said, "Certainly not." And we noticed the curtains were moving and looked out the window, people running around. And, I went out onto the hall to find, in those days, you had a little Chinese lady at a desk, and she would mark in when you came in and when you went there, monitoring you basically. And she'd gone and all the doors were open. And as I stood in that door frame, I just remembered that Australian man: within this year, you'll be in an earthquake, and it's where God wants you to be. So for me, it was quite startling. And I think from there, I came back, and when I got back to Guernsey, the phone went, and the Foreign Office wanted me to go to London, and I went and met with people in the Foreign Office, and they've said, "Look, we're trying to build some relationships between UK and China, and they want you to go as their consultant. If you go, we'll support you." So suddenly, what was this trip of fact-finding that turned into something much, much more?
Well, that's the end of part 1 of The Profile, brought to you in partnership with Premier Christianity magazine. If you would like a free copy of Premier Christianity, then head over to www.premierchristianity.com/free sample. Join us after the ads to hear more from Robert and Liz Glover.
Do you want to stay informed on the best of what's happening in the UK church today? Premier Christianity magazine is for you. The UK's leading Christian magazine is published every month and features interviews with Christian leaders, in-depth reporting, reviews, columnists, and loads more. And best of all, you can try it for free. Head to our website now to request the latest edition, worth £5.95, completely free of charge.
Visit premierchristianity.com/free sample.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Welcome back to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio. In part 2, Robert and Liz Glover share their thoughts on the one-child policy in China and reveal some interesting details about their friendship with missionaries Jackie Pullinger and Francis Chan. Listen in. And so let's go back to talk about the orphanages then. So the institutions, the state-run orphanages. Tell me a bit about those, and tell me about the one-child policy and what impact that had on the country.
Yeah. Well, I think the important thing here is I don't think people really fully understand culturally why these things were happening. And living there gave us a better insight that the population had gone out of control. And of course, where man intervenes into many things, then you get disaster. But this one-child policy was supposed to be a way to slow down the population. In Chinese culture, it is as important for the parents to take care of the children as the children to take care of the adults. So in China, when we arrived, there was no old age pension, there was no old age care, there was no old age homes, or even in hospitals, there were doctors, but the family had to take care of, change the sheets, wash the patient. So the situation is, in Chinese culture, when you have a daughter, where she grows up, she is when she gets married, her duty is to take care of her husband's parents, and it is your son's daughter that's duty is to take care of you. And so, in a sense, this wasn't a gender issue. This was a cultural issue around people, securing their care in old age. So what we found was that there were many girls that had been abandoned because of the one-child policy. And I think it had got to the stage in 1996 where it was in crisis. When I arrived first time into Guangzhou, there were 5 children to 1 bed. And look, what I realized very quickly is if we were going to make a difference to the children, we had to work through the staff. The staff had no training. They had no understanding. They had very basic training. And so we had to serve them and train them to envision social welfare reform. And I was convinced the only way to do that is within the government and within the government's resources.
And I think as well, we can so easily come from a nation and throw rocks across the world at different situations. But I think I realized as well that, China and the history of China and through the Cultural Revolution and different aspects of their history, that any of us who had grown up in similar situations, if God had decided to place us in China instead of placing us, because of course the Bible teaches that where we live and when we're born and when we die is all ordained by God. And so therefore, if we'd have been born in China, we would be exactly the same as the Chinese people. Many of the Chinese people say it's our responsibility to have 1 child. And I can remember Nikki and Silla Lee, who of course run the marriage course. They came over. We're good friends with Nikki and Silla Lee, and Silla. We were just chatting at the time, and I think we'd got some Chinese people with us, and she suddenly had this awareness of the feeling of being told that you could only have 1 child. So that freedom that actually God has given us had been taken, and how that might feel as a woman, as a mother, and the weight of that. And I think she got quite emotional. And I just think that we all have history. Every nation has history, and we have culture. We all have culture, and none of us, we can't boast in the things that we have. The Bible says that we can only boast in Christ, the cross, Christ crucified, and we have grace for each other, and we have. Of course, the Chinese can sometimes look at the West and say things like, is it true that you live in houses with 3 and 4 bedrooms and there's only 2 people live in that house? Is that true? And we have to say, yes, it is. There's so much that we can learn from each other. And so I think I'm trying to preach a message of love and grace from what I'm saying.
And I think the important thing for us is from us as an organisation, our intellectual property was in the sense of working with the government. We had good relationships with the government, both nationally and locally, and we wanted to serve and encourage them to look at how they could reform their social welfare through. I always remember I sat down, we signed the first deal, and I said, the important thing about Chinese history and culture is not to lose face. We will never criticize you. We will never show bad pictures about you. We will honor you. We want you to be successful. And this was part of building trust, from 2 different cultures. I said, on the reverse, you have to understand that in the British culture, we have integrity, honesty, and we want to preserve and protect every part of our finances, every penny. And he turned to me and said, every penny? I said, every penny. And we shook hands, and that was agreed and in place for the whole 20 years. We never went into a place where we would make them lose face and honor. and they always protected our finances and resources, and to work towards a positive alternative to what they had been before for children.
Let's talk a bit about the individuals whose lives have been changed by your work, Liz and Robert. Tell me some of the stories of the children.
Yeah, well, I think after Shanghai had been extremely successful. We had an international independent evaluation by Professor June Thorburn, and her closing remarks. You've got to remember that China had been receiving probably for a decade all negative responses. She said that this was probably one of the best projects worldwide. And as you can imagine, the pride and the sense of honor in that. And so here was something that China was doing well. Shanghai Project had placed 300 children into families, and the success rate was exceptional. And following on from there, we went to work in a city on the other side of China, in Chengdu, Sichuan, and we were presented with a little baby who had a hole in the heart, and they thought she might die. She was skin and bone, and would we place her into a family? And of course we did, and they were amazing. They just loved and nurtured this baby, and I kept in touch from a distance, and eventually went back a couple of years later. It was a few years later, because she was there in her ballerina outfit, and she was doing some moves in the hospital reception, and everybody was thrilled because now she was quite chubby cheeked and strong, and we can do the operation on her heart. And so the consultant surgeon took her in to do the tests, and I remember him coming out and lifting his glasses, wiping a tear, and he said, "I don't understand it, but there is nothing wrong with her heart." And it made national news. Here was communist China, and the headlines were "Miracle Baby Healed by the Love of a Mother." And from that point, it seemed to change, that everybody across the nation wanted to learn how we can move from orphanages into families in the community. Mm-hmm. So that was quite a remarkable story, and it made a huge difference. And as we rolled out right across China, the numbers started to grow. But the other thing that we had a new minister come in, and he wanted to make his mark, so he started to build new orphanages. I was so in despair when all this was going so well, and suddenly this chap had come up with a blue sky project to build new institutions. And I remember going down to Guizhou in southern China and seeing this wonderful building, and the children were all dressed very smartly, and the food was remarkable, and the playground looked like Disneyland. It was incredible. And I'm sort of scratching my head thinking, I don't know, are we doing the right thing? We're putting these children in families in poor villages. And then we got the opportunity to go in the minibus. The minibus had the name of the orphanage on the side of the minibus, into this village. And when I got out of the minibus, here was this tiny little boy with a stick trying to hit me. He attacked me from nowhere. I couldn't understand. Why was he so angry with me? And so someone translated his words. And he said, "You see, yesterday I climbed to the top of that tree. Do you see that tree? I went to the top of the tree. And when I got to the top, all the village came out. They all know my name. They shouted my name. They asked me to come down. They told me to be safe. And people here know who I am. They know my name. And you see this dog, it's my dog. It's not his dog. It's not even my mother's or father's dog. It's my dog, belongs to me. And every day I go across the fields to that school. That's my school. And I've got all my school friends. And when I come out of school, the dog is waiting for me. He comes home with me. And Auntie always gives me biscuits. She knows my name. And Uncle over there, he gives me an apple, and he knows my name. I have mother, father, brothers, sisters. And in fact, all the village know who I am here. And I'm not going back to that orphanage." He thought they had brought me in the orphanage minibus to grab him and take him back. And to me, that put everything in perspective. That boy had everything in that village. He had identity. Everybody knew his name. He had purpose. He had his own little dog. His life was rich. And it just helped me to keep things in perspective. Doesn't matter how glittery or nice the institution is. The value of a child's life in a family, in a community, in a village was so much more important.
After many years of working in China, you discovered that most of the families who had taken orphans in were in fact Christians. Were you surprised by that?
Well, I'm not surprised when you think the biggest revival in world history of Christianity is happening in China, as we were there. And so the good thing was it wasn't instigated by me. And what I often say to people is, you know what, God sometimes asks you to do a bit of the jigsaw puzzle. He doesn't ask you to do the whole lot. So he didn't tell me to put them in Christian families. He didn't tell me to evangelize the families or the children. He just said, put children in families. So I wasn't surprised later on when I found, I always remember a train journey. I went on a train journey from Beijing to Baotao in Inner Mongolia. And when I arrived, I was looking pretty rough. I'd slept overnight on the train, and I was met on the train station by the army because my friend was the minister. And so the army came to pick me up, and black cars with flashing lights. And we had a meeting with the mayor of Baotao. On the journey on the way up, I went with some officials, some government officials from Beijing, and they were saying, well, we know you're a Christian, Robert. You know, and we're not bothered about that because, you know, what you do is you know, obviously that's why you're here. But we want you to know when we get to Baotao, there are no Christians in Baotao. They're all Buddhist, and there's lots of Muslim, and there's Taoist and Confucian, but there's no Christians. So we don't want you to be disappointed. And I'm saying, well, no. We want to get children in the families. But yeah, we want you to know there are no Christians in Baotao. We arrived and had a splendid meal with the mayor, and then they brought in the first 20 families that were going to take the children from the Baotao orphanage. And my friend from Beijing then made a joke about me being a big Englishman and a Christian. And of course, no one's like that in China. We're all small and no one believes in Christianity. I went quiet for a little while, and one lady put her hand up and she said, I'm a Christian. And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. All 20 were Christians. And so he was a little bit embarrassed on the way home. We were on the train playing cards. He said, how come? We don't know about this. How come they're all Christians? And I said, well, now is my opportunity. If you really want to know, I can show you. This is part of our gospel message. We care for widows and orphans. This is part of our DNA and who we are. This is what we do. And he said, when I get back to Beijing, I'm going to do some research. He was quite a senior official in 3 provinces to find out how many Christians there are doing family placement. And of course, it took him a few weeks, but he came back to me and he said, you're not going to believe this, Robert, but there are 80% of the families, 80% of the families are Christian. And I wasn't surprised because of what was happening in China and what had been happening and is still happening in China with Christian growth. But what it did teach me is, you know, as I say again, we sometimes get asked to do a piece of the jigsaw. And when we try to do the whole lot, we take God out of the equation. So if we just we're obedient and faithful to what God asks us to do, it allows him to speak in a much wider way to the nation.
So let's talk about the church in China. So we're hearing these amazing stories of revival, the strength of the church, you know, estimates of 60 million Christians. You actually think that the 60 million figure is a conservative figure, don't you? You actually think it's sort of more like double that. Can you talk to me a bit about what you saw in China of Christianity?
Well, of course, all the work I do for many years was with the government. So I didn't come across in the early part. It was really when the earthquake came in Sichuan, the biggest earthquake in China for many years, that we were there on day 2. In fact, the biggest aftershock we were debating whether we should go into the hotel. Everyone was sleeping on the streets. It was a horrendous time, because this was the year 2008 that China was going to show the world. They were coming, to show what an amazing Olympics they were going to do. That was their Olympic year. And this, in the May, this devastation of an earthquake, which, as far as your eye could see, every house was flattened. And it was quite a horrendous time. This is where I bumped into some Christian pastors they mobilized Christians from all over China to go down and just serve. They were quite amazing people. And, I've kept in touch with them ever since. And it was an opportunity in seeing, the work connecting to the church and then helping to engage the church in promoting to their families to take children into their families. So, but yes, I think the Chinese church is remarkable. I do think it's over 100 million. And, from certainly the people I work with and network in China, that would be the case. I think the official figure is something that in China, everything is minimalized rather than, going to the maximum. So, I don't think there's much else I would say there. I think generally there had been a quite a opening up and quite a relaxation and freedom. I think more recently, since we've been out of China, that's changed. And often what happens in Chinese government, even though we talk about democracies, they tend to have two wings of the party. One is more liberal, one's more conservative. And so they almost overstep each other. And I think this one has become quite almost going back to some old values. So really pressing down on any faith-based organizations or faith-based. So I think there's been a change after many years of opening up, where, I think we go back to Hu Jintao talking about harmonious society, everybody working together. Jiang Zemin opening up very, very, at great speed. But I think more recently they've had much more of a tightening up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing that, aren't we, with the Uyghur Muslims as well? Do you have any views on what's happening there in terms of freedom of?
Well, the only thing I wrote in the book is that when we were there, we were still placing children in that region with the Uyghurs. And what I had noticed was almost like a watering down of their faith in the sense that when you went to the family, often Chinese family are very tight. They live together. You had Granddad who was still wearing his white cap and he would read the Quran and go to the mosque. And then you'd have Dad who wouldn't wear the white cap but read the Quran and go occasionally. And then you had his children that weren't doing any of it, So there was a sense, even then when we were working into the Uyghur area, that there was a watering down. Certainly, while we were living there was lots of tension. There was often, rioting and, lots of problems between the Han and the Uyghur people.
Mm.
Yeah. So, from the Chinese point of view, they always felt they were kind of a thorn in their side. And, there were, we knew while we were there was some stabbings in Kunming, and then there was a bomb in somewhere else in China. So it was always in the background of the news that there was some tensions that were going on.
I mean, you used to say, didn't you, that the rest of the world always looking at other nations and the threat from externally, but China is always looking. They've got a fifth of the world's population in one nation, and so they're always looking at what's going on within their nation as to what is creating conflict, I suppose.
That's in China's history and culture. It's always been an internal struggle. We've had world wars of, fighting with Germany or, 2 world wars and, conflicts in different places of the world. But for China, it's always an internal struggle of maintaining that unity when you've got 1.4 billion people. And so for them as a government, they're trying to maintain that unity and not have it, segregated or broken down.
But presumably the Uyghurs feel that in doing that, their freedoms are being quashed, their freedom to have their own faith and their way of life is being quashed.
I think anything outside of, I think anything outside of China and the unity of China through the Communist Party will feel threatened.
In your book, Robert, you talk about your friendship with Jackie Pullinger and Francis Chan. In what ways have those 2 missionaries influenced you?
Well, I think Jackie very much in the early stages. We talked about we had to go through Hong Kong. I just love being around. Not so much Jackie, but what she produced. In the old camp and the people. Here were these hardened criminals that many of them with fingers missing and scars and tattoos and these from triads, and here they are all together jumping and worshiping Jesus, and and if they didn't dance well enough, then she would tell them, come on. I always remember saying, you dance in the nightclubs, you dance in the pubs, now you dance for Jesus. And they were dancing, and so it was very radical to see her work. And I think over the years, we just mutually benefit from spending time together. It's kind of, I don't talk about what's going on with her. She doesn't talk about, but we can talk together and offload and support one another. And I think what happened was, you may know that she was married to John, and when John died, she came up to Shanghai and lived with us for a little while. It's a very short period of time. But, we just became very close. We're brothers and sisters. And there's a natural sense of understanding of what our callings are and how we go about that. And so, she just became naturally over the years. I can't say it was a condensed time, but over the years we became really good friends and support. She'd been a fantastic support to us. And then Francis sort of came out of the blue. I think Francis was very keen on working out what was going on in China and said, can I come with you around China? And I remember he said, I don't want to go, I don't want to preach, I don't want anybody to know I'm there. We just want to go quietly and go in the back door and find out and listen to the church and hear what's happening. And, I just sense, I want to hear what God's doing in China. So he came. The first church we went to in Beijing, we sat at the back. It was quite funny. It was
big church.
Packed, big church, massive church. And we sat at the back, but word had got out. There was an famous American pastor. And at the end of the service, all these young teenagers came running to back, ran past Francis. And he's giving me the eye, and came to me, surrounded me. And they said, will you sign your book for us? And I said, well, I haven't written a book. And they said, yes, you have. Purpose-Driven Life. They thought I was Rick Warren.
You do look a bit like him, actually, now that you say it.
Yeah. So you imagine the rest of the trip, Francis was like, come on, Rick, And we spent time in Shanghai, in Wuhan, because that's where a lot of my connections are in Wuhan. And then down in Chengdu, and then we finished in Yunnan. I said to him, look, we've been to a few churches. Would you like to go to one of the villages in Yunnan where 70 families, they're ethnic minority family, they're all Christian in this family. They've taken about 100 children, disabled children. And so we went there, and he was blown away. He said, "This is why God sent me. It's nothing to do with the church. This is it. This is it. These people are amazing." He said, "I don't think I've ever met such a group of people as these." And if you ever have a chance to see the village, he speaks. It's a video about this village. CBN call it City on a Hill. And like he says, when we wake up in the morning, I think about myself. I clean my teeth. I want to get. These people are just waking up every day and attending to the needs of these children. And it blew his mind. It really did. That apparently, I think 3 generations ago, there was an English missionary went to this village. He didn't ever. I think he saw one person saved, which was the grandfather. The grandfather led the father to the Lord. He then led a small group, and then the next guy led the whole village. And so I said, "Are they all Christians in the village?" "Oh," he said, "we've got a couple back from the university, and they need a bit more discipling and mentoring." The whole village were just amazing, and we stayed friends ever since. And he interestingly, he decided he was going to move to Hong Kong. He found out the community and the building that they would be working from. And he did a little video from when he arrived in Hong Kong, because before he left San Francisco, there was a box on top of his wardrobe, and he found a picture of his mother. His mother died in childbirth with him, and she was ministering in the same building, in the same community. And it was almost like God had taken him back to where his mother had ministered as a young teenage woman. So fascinating. So yeah, we just really get on well with them. And I think we're kingdom builders. I think understanding that there's we've got to build a kingdom is important, and so there are those links really.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of your plans for the future then with Care for Children, what's on the horizon in 2021 and beyond for you?
So with China, we feel they're doing a really good job. And so interestingly, it was hard to get into China. Nobody wanted us. Now it's hard to get out. Everybody don't want us to leave. So what we're doing is we're keeping an office in Beijing. We've digitalized all our material so it can be used. And China's such an influence and got us such a great model that we want to keep our relationship with that we can introduce to other countries. We're working in Thailand, right across Thailand, and in Vietnam. And at the moment, we're looking at the Cambodian government. We're interested in what we were doing. We took them up to Shanghai, and they saw the work, and it was like a light switch went on. And they are now really keen for this to happen in Cambodia. Cambodia is a huge challenge in the sense that the government hasn't taken responsibility. It's left child welfare to the NGO world, so it's been unregulated, legislated. And I think now is an opportunity to set a model and teach the Cambodian government that they can do something that is inspirational for their children. Mm-hmm. And why shouldn't a generation of children back into families in China become another generation of children in Cambodia?
Well, Liz and Robert, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your incredible journey.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for today. But see you same time, same place next week.